Welcome to The Friend I Wish I Had, the show that was made for listeners everywhere, looking for some company in the uncertainty of this thing called life. You will hear stories of personal events, lived experiences, and resilience. Stories that remind you that you are not alone. When you feel there is no one to talk to, you will find a story to hold on to, like the friend you wish you had. I am your host, Sandy Falcon, and I am honored to be the friend I wish I had. Let's begin. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'd like to start off with a bit of my history. For many of you who don't know me, I was born in Ecuador. I came to Canada when I was about a year old with my parents. My parents met in Ecuador and got married, and soon after decided that they would come back to Canada to live. The first time I moved was when I was in grade 4, mid year. Up until that point, my parents had lived at the same place in the same building, and I had a very well rounded childhood. Both of my parents were very hardworking. Um, I lived a really normal life, and I was very happy. Um, by the time we moved in the fourth grade, um, my world started to change a bit. I wasn't used to being in a different school and in a different area. I had lived in a building up until that point. Um, so we moved into a townhouse, and I thought it was like a mansion. It was huge to me in my grade 4 eyes. And again, I tried to adjust. Moving midway through the year could be tough on anybody, and I remember it being very difficult for me to fit in. But nevertheless, I tried and I adjusted. By the beginning of grade 5, we moved again. We moved from the townhouse and we moved into a flat, so an apartment above a store. That was also a wonderful apartment. I loved it there. My parents were still together at that point, and I was happy. I remember starting at my new school and making friends and fitting in and feeling comfortable and happy. Um, And at some point in grade 5, I would probably say before Christmas, um, my parents separated. When they separated, I felt lost. I didn't understand why they had separated. I loved my father very, very, very much, and I loved my mother very much, and I didn't understand why they couldn't love each other anymore. It was a very confusing time in my life, and moving around didn't help. Nevertheless, I continued in school that year, and I remember grade 5 being a very traumatic year. I remember having an outburst in class because I was just under so much stress, and I hadn't done any of my homework, and um, I was lost. I didn't feel like the same person. So that was in grade 5. Soon after that, I remember that my mom got together with my stepdad, the same man that she is married to today, has been in my life since I was in the 5th grade. He was, or he is, an incredible human being. He is loving. He treated my mom like gold, and he did the same with me. He was always very supportive and caring, and He was everything you would hope a father would be. Not throwing any shade on my own dad. My own dad, my biological dad, is a fantastic human being, and I love him dearly as well. Um, After my mom got together with my stepdad, that was in grade five, so maybe mid grade five, end of grade five. By the time we got to grade six, the beginning of grade six, we moved again. And I went to a new school again. And now I was living in a building again with my new parents, so my mom and my stepdad. And I attended a school that I really, really liked, and I was happy there. Um, my world was a bit different then. I think if I started to lash out a little bit, I started to feel pushed aside, um, and maybe jealous of the relationship my mom had with my stepdad, which I would assume is a normal feeling for any child who is in a new home or a blended family or a new family. But I didn't doubt how much he loved my mom and how much he loved me. I still saw my dad every weekend or every other weekend, um, and I was happy. I mean, I was well rounded up until then, and I started to fit in. I started to make friends, and I was good. I was in a good place. So I lived there all of grade six and grade seven. Um, Before the end of grade seven, my parents broke the news to me that we would be moving back to Ecuador. My stepdad was also from Ecuador, and my mom decided that she wanted to go back, and my stepdad agreed that he wanted to go back, and they thought that it would be better for them. And at the end of my grade seven year, we were moving back to Ecuador. So by this point, I'm 13 years old. My mom and my dad were legally divorced. And I remember I didn't want to move back to Ecuador. I wanted to stay in Canada. I wanted to stay here because I was going to grade eight, which is like one of the most important years of your life when you're a kid, your eighth grade. Um, and I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay with my dad. I wanted to finish school here. Um, but my dad, because of his work and the shifts that he was working, he was not going to be able to take care of me. I would have spent a lot of time alone, and that wasn't a good option for me, not for a 13-year-old child to be alone most of the time. So they decided that my dad gave my mom permission to take me to Ecuador to go and live. Now, I was not happy. I did not want to go. I was really not excited to go there. Up until this point, I did go to Ecuador though, every single summer. I had been going to Ecuador every single year, mostly with my parents until they had gotten divorced. And then after they got divorced, I remember I used to travel alone every summer. So I think pretty much from the time I was 10 up until I was 19 years old, I went back to Ecuador. So I had a really good relationship with all of my aunts, with my cousins, my grandparents were there, and it wasn't strange to me to go back to Ecuador. It was a part of my life, so it wasn't too much of a shock. Um, when we got back to Ecuador, my parents had decided that they were going to live in a small town, and they thought that it would be better for me not to move to that town and that I should stay in the capital city in Quito and go to school. So I was left to live with my aunt and my five cousins and my uncle. So seven of us, um, eight of us, were all living together. And I was to start my eighth grade year in Quito at a school that was all Spanish speaking, and I hated it. And I don't use the word hate often. I don't like the word hate, but I really, really didn't like it. I was very unhappy. I was really stressed out. I remember crying so much. I just wanted to be with my mom, and I didn't care where she lived. I just wanted to go live with them. So I ended up going to live in this small, tiny little town, and school was the complete opposite of anything I had ever experienced in my life. Um, I remember going there and I started to adjust. Um, and I stayed there for a bit, but I decided that at some point in my 13-year-old brain, I decided that I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't feel right. I didn't feel like I fit in. I didn't feel like I belonged with my mom and my stepdad. I felt like an outsider. It was really weird. So I remember telling my dad, calling my dad and saying, Daddy, I want to come visit you for my break, for my school break. And he said, sure, no problem. My mom said, okay. And I remember talking to my sister. I do have an older sister. She's 12 years older than me. And I remember telling my sister that I wanted to come back. And she said, okay. And I ended up leaving. I left Ecuador and came back to Canada on a supposed visit. And the day my sister picked me up from the airport, she told me, or she asked me rather, she said, "You're not going back, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not." My sister already knew I was not going back to Ecuador. And my sister at that point stepped up to the plate and decided that she would help my dad and that she would be the one to take care of me because, like I had mentioned before, he had been working some shift work that was really difficult for him to take care of me all of the time. So I ended up living with my sister and my niece at the time. Um, and it was incredible. It was a very different life. I don't want to say it was difficult because that's not what it was. It was different. My sister at the time when she took me in was probably 26, between 26 and 28 years old. Um, and she had her daughter, and then she had me. So it was an interesting dynamic, the three of us living together. And my sister did everything that she possibly could do to raise um, a teenager at the time. She enrolled me in school. I finished grade 8 in Canada. So, like, I think I finished the last couple of months here, like March till June out of school. And then I went to high school. And I was with my sister for my first 2 years of high school, um, visiting my dad back and forth, back and forth. And when I lived with my sister, we moved a lot as well. But by this time, I was so used to moving. It was nothing for me to pick up and move from one place to another. And it was so normal to me by then. Um, and by the time I got to grade 10, my dad had met who is now my stepmom. And when he met my stepmom, she was from the States. She's from New Orleans, well, from Louisiana. And my dad got married to her. And at some point, we thought it was a good idea that I go and live in Kenner, Louisiana, with my stepmom, my stepbrother, and my stepsister. Um, so for my grade 11 year, which is my junior year in the United States, I moved to the US and I lived in Kenner and I went to school there and I loved it. I fell in love with Kenner. I just felt like Kenner was home. Even though my dad didn't live with us at the moment, he was still living in Canada trying to get papers together so he could come live with us in Kenner. I lived with my stepmom and my stepsister, my stepbrother, with mama, which is grandma. That was my stepmom's mom. And they were so inviting, and they loved me and treated me like family from the minute I was a part of that home. And I just loved it. I made really good friends in Kenner, friends that I'm still in contact with today. Um, and I was happy. I was genuinely happy. I finally felt that I was in the right place. I had a mom. Even though my dad wasn't really around, I still felt like I had everything I needed. So it was good. But my dad didn't move to Kenner. My dad moved to Georgia. And somehow we thought it was a good idea for me to finish my senior year in Georgia. So I moved from Kenner to Georgia to live with my dad. And my stepsister came, and our friend came, and my stepsister went to school. She went to college in Georgia, and I was doing my senior year there. I did not like Georgia. I did not like living in Georgia. No offense to anybody from Georgia. Everybody is amazing in Georgia. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I had learned to love Louisiana for whatever reason it was, but Louisiana was home. And I moved to Georgia. And I remember that it was time for me to go visit my mom because my mom had come back from Ecuador. Up until this point, I had barely seen my mom at all. Um, so from when I was 13 till I was 17, I had barely seen her. I barely spent any time with her. So I went to visit my mom in October of my senior year. Um, it was actually November, Thanksgiving of my senior year. I went to visit my mom, and it was supposed to be for Thanksgiving, US Thanksgiving. It was only supposed to be a weekend. And when it was time for me to come back, I got to the immigration, and I remember them saying, "Do you have a green card?" And I said, "No, we're doing the application right now." And the officers told me I couldn't go back because my application wasn't finalized. I wasn't supposed to leave the country, and by leaving the country, my application was null and void, and I was not allowed to go back to the States for 1 full year. I was devastated. I could not believe I couldn't go home. To me, home was the US. It was just it was part of my plan. It was everything was working to plan. I was supposed to go to college. I was in a good place. My head was on right. I was in a good path. And all of that got stripped away from me in an instant. And I had to go back to my mom's apartment with a woman that I hadn't lived with for 4 years. And all of a sudden, I was lost in my own mind. I didn't know what to do. Even though Canada's been my home forever, I felt so lost. I felt so unattached. I didn't have any bearings at that point. It was just a mess. And very soon thereafter, my life went on a complete downward spiral. Well, that's all for today's episode of The Friend I Wish I Had. Thank you for listening. Please join me again so we can continue to keep each other company. Be sure to subscribe to my podcast, and don't forget to visit my website and get an extra dose of friendship. Talk to you soon. Bye.